Welcome, Beachies, to Free Friday number 3, a late night special this time because we have a far west guest tonight, all the way from Spokane, Washington. Dr. Kyle Varner is going to join us. So sit down and get comfortable. We're about to dive into the topic of COVID 19.
So look, the Beach Brothers Show is a show where we deal with Virginia business and politics.
Well, I'm Conrad Chesviner. I'm a Hampton Roads political activist. Best ideas for community improvement happen to drive me.
I help folks that are approaching retirement and in their retirement years.
I have what I call the empowerment agenda. And that means that everything I do is focused on empowerment. You want to give a salute to Tally and Twine. It's time for you to have a high quality watch made in Virginia, made in Portsmouth, Virginia, from Tally and Twine. We want to say thanks to Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier for their great level of sponsorship. If you need a new car, you don't need to go far. Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier. And ladies, if you want your brows to say, wow, check out IamLitaWee.com. Microblading by IamLitaWee.com. I'm Seiko Varner. I do credit fixes, tax resolutions. I lend private money to real estate investors, and we do debt consolidations. If you need any of these services, contact me as provided. And now it's time to get beachy on the Beach Brothers Show.
Once again, I'm Conrad Chesviner, local activist, co-founder of the Virginia Beach Progressive Caucus, dedicated to identifying and promoting progressive candidates and policies in the Virginia Beach area. I'm a member of the Hampton Roads Black Caucus's Community Action Team, repping Virginia Beach, and we help advocate for candidates and policies that help marginalized communities in the area. I drive a 2017 Volkswagen Jetta. We're about to face a shortage on computer chips, which will make new cars harder to come by. Make sure you stop into 1248 South Military Highway to secure yourself a quality car. Go see Charlie Roy and hammer out the details on a vehicle you'll feel confident in over the next few years, like me. Now, I reached out to tonight's guest because he's vocal and an authoritative voice within the libertarian ranks. He also happens to be an expert in tonight's COVID topic. Dr. Kyle Varner lives in Spokane, Washington, and he is an internal medicine physician with special interest in critical care and hospital medicine. He's a healthcare policy expert and advocate of free markets. He'll join me and Chesapeake, Virginia friend Sandy Leathers on the story of COVID-19. Sandy is a public health educator. She's an advocate and community outreach volunteer. She's a registered Democrat, and we will bring them on right now. So, how are you guys doing tonight?
Hey, good evening.
I'm doing great, considering it's been a busy day here in Virginia for cases. Long day.
Definitely. Long day. Well, first, Dr. Varner, give us a little bit more about your history, both on, say, the medical field, political field, if you will, your education, anything else cool that I might have left out for you.
All right. Well, I got my bachelor's degree from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. And then I went off to medical school at the American University of Antigua College of Medicine. Did my clinical part of medical school in Puerto Rico, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I learned Spanish. Then I did my residency in internal medicine at Tripler Army Medical Center. And then I've been practicing ever since then as a hospitalist. My libertarian credentials actually go back a little farther than that because I joined the Libertarian Party when I was 15 years old. I got involved in the Harry Brown for President campaign in the year 2000. But with much chagrin, I admit that I was a Ron Paul fanboy in both 2008 and 2012. Was a delegate at the 2016 and 2018 Libertarian National Conventions where I voted for Gary Johnson. And after I got out of residency and started making money, I started donating pretty heavily to the Libertarian Party and Libertarian Party candidates and libertarian causes. And so that's led to me getting a bit of a position within the party in terms of people calling me and party leaders talking to me. But unfortunately, I don't think it's led to very many people actually listening to me when it comes to COVID-19. But here we are.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Because we want to hear definitely about your expert opinion on this matter. So we'll get on to that more later. Ms. Leathers, tell us a little bit about yourself, what we should know about, just you and your community-driven outreach.
Okay, easy enough. I started in public health right out of college. I'm a graduate of Hampton University, got my bachelor's in biology. Spent first few years of my life doing shoe leather epi, old school shoe leather epi at the STD HIV clinic at the local level, state health department, city health department, where I also got my master's in public health while I worked clinic. Promoted myself to general epidemiology, where we went from STDs to general outbreaks, infections locally, hepatitis, things like that. Then I went regionally from the regional to the state level, and I worked as the Southeastern Regional Representative for the Vaccine for Children program in the state of Virginia. Mostly spent a lot of time educating and helping practitioners use Medicaid vaccines for children at risk. But now I am a COVID investigator for the state health department. I am a contractor, but I'm representing myself today as a health educator, 20 years of health education in the Hampton Roads region. I also worked for the Democratic Party as the executive captain and helped spearhead their Western branch get out the vote efforts in 2018, 2016, 2008, and 2010. Sorry, my numbers are all jumbled up. And I'm also a mom of one very noisy toddler who is still awake.
All right, let's get straight into the topic of COVID. I was like everyone else, learning about a brand new type of virus in China in 2019 and early 2020. And I remember the story of the whistleblower doctor in a Chinese hospital who died trying to warn a lot of people. While it was interesting, it really took a turn for the, oh God, this is real, when Dr. Michael Osterholm appeared on Joe Rogan's show. So Dr. Varner, break down your understanding of coronaviruses, the family of them, and the possible genesis of this particular one.
All right, so coronavirus, the word corona is Latin for crown, and that refers to the shape of the virus. It kind of looks under an electron microscope like a crown, and so there's a whole family of coronaviruses that cause a variety of diseases. There are some coronaviruses that cause illnesses that we typically associate with the common cold. There's a coronavirus that causes something called feline infectious peritonitis in cats, and then there's the SARS family of coronaviruses. The SARS family of coronaviruses are known to cause, in a portion of the people they infect anyway, very severe disease. And this is kind of the third encounter the world has had with the SARS coronavirus, right? We had SARS, which made it all the way to Toronto and then got kind of stamped out, right? And then we had MERS, which was having an intermediate host with camels in the Middle East. And now we have COVID-19, or as we know it scientifically, SARS-2 coronavirus, because it's actually the third, it's not the second. But so the third brush with this family of virus that we've had, and I mean, humanity's probably had other brushes with it, right? With similar viruses maybe in the distant past, but we didn't live in a globalized world at that time. A few hundred years ago, maybe it burned its way through one village, or and then it went away. Where do they come from? Well, we know that the reservoir of these viruses tends to be like in bat caves. Bats have lower body temperatures. They can harbor viruses for a long time. So there are a lot of viruses in bats. And do I know, everybody, this is the big question. Did it come from the lab in Wuhan? And my answer is maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I might even say probably. Just because that's where people could have come into contact with animals that had the virus and things like that. But I really don't know. I'm not an expert in that. But one way or another, this virus made the jump from bats into something intermediary, and whether that intermediary was an animal in the wild or whether that intermediary was an animal in a lab, I don't know. And somehow it got into humans and it created a pandemic. And that's where I come in. I don't know where it came from. I don't really care as a doctor where it came from, because here we are dealing with it, and we have to deal with it. We can't go back in time. I mean, if we had a time machine, we could fix all this, but we don't. So we just have to go forward. We can't. So I think a lot of talk about, well, did it come from the lab or not, is, first of all, I don't have the ability to determine that. Maybe, some people in the CIA do, and they probably would never declassify it. It's just kind of like this esoteric. It's an interesting thing to talk about. Very interesting. And maybe there's some fruit to be had in terms of how we want to, regulate government spending and research and biosecurity issues. Maybe there's fruit there. But today, we have a pandemic that's killing a lot of people, and we've got to deal with that reality regardless of how it started.
We have a couple of comments right off the bat from a friend of the show, Nikki Zimmerman. She says, thank you. I hope she means that thanks for bringing this out in such a way that's not going to be so heated, because this could be such a heated topic for some unknown reason. Also, she wants to know if we're going to get back on the restrictions, and that might be a question later in the show. So stay tuned. Nikki will be looking at that a little later. Now, Miss Sandy, I want to see if this might be something you could touch on here. If you could contrast like SARS-CoV-2 with flus and colds, other viruses. Is COVID, to your knowledge, particularly stronger? How contagious is it compared to what we knew about viruses in 2019?
Oh, yes. Well, it should be, I won't say obvious, but of course, COVID-19 is a lot more dangerous, a pathogen to our current global society than common flu. Flu is seasonal. It does kill people annually, particularly people who are immune compromised. So it's not, to me, it's not even comparable with flu. Typically, a person who is positive for influenza, whether it's A or B, they may possibly transmit the virus to maybe 2 people. That's the positivity rate with flu. With SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19, it's the alpha version. It's more like 4 or 6 people per person who can transmit the virus. And now that we're dealing with the Delta variant, we're seeing it even higher than the original, the virus that we were fighting last year. With COVID-19, I need to correct myself. For last year, we would maybe see 3-4 people. Now we're seeing 8. One person can infect up to 8 people. So the positivity rate is a lot higher with this particular variant. Also, we do have a vaccine a vaccine that's available to prevent serious illness. It was never designed to prevent. I hate that it was marketed that way, as a get out of free card. You get your vaccine and you never have to worry about COVID again. That was not ideal. We really should have honed in and really pushed the message, in my opinion, that the vaccine is preventative in a way that it prevents mortality. It keeps people from dying or having severe illness. It turns what was a deadly virus into something that causes acute symptoms, a little irritable, makes you sick, can be spread, but certainly not seeing people on ventilators, needing oxygen, having these long-term symptoms, brain fog, loss of memory. I'm seeing people who have chronic heart conditions now, palpitations, the people who are having long-term lung damage. That is not what we see with influenza A and B. We don't see these chronic breakdowns of systems the way that we do with COVID-19. So to me, it's like comparing Little League and the Yankees. It's just they're both baseball, but they are not the same.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say follow up, Ms.
I wanted to make a comment and maybe ask about what you said about how you think that the vaccine has been sold a little bit wrong as a get out of jail free card. And I agree with you that it's been in many cases oversold. For example, I remember when President Biden went on TV and said, if you get the vaccine, you ain't going to get COVID. And I thought, well, that's not true. That's an oversimplification. But I think it's important, and this is a hard concept that I found it's a hard concept to convey, but the relative risk reduction of getting COVID-19 to begin with one of the mRNA vaccines is still greater than 90%. And I mean, that's a relative risk reduction is a term used in biostatistics. So it's like, if you got a risk of 30%, then maybe I've got a risk of 3% because I took the vaccine, right? That's enormous. It doesn't eliminate the risk. And if your baseline risk goes up because it's very nasty variant is circulating, then the absolute risk of the vaccinated goes up as well.
That's right.
And I've noticed, and I've thought that, a lot of what goes into the vaccine has to do, or a lot of the mistrust centers around. I don't know that that this is really good faith, but a lot of it seems to center around people not understanding the nuances of what people are saying about the vaccine or what the studies show. And then when they don't understand the nuances and they see evidence that contradicts their simplistic understanding or the simplistic way it was explained, then they feel misled. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you in public health, and maybe this is where my question comes in. I don't know how you in public health can go about explaining a concept that's very complex in a way that people will understand, and then also not feel misled because you simplified it too much and it seems like you lied to them.
Right.
Could you sell it using reverse lottery logic?
Well, what do you mean by that before I answer that?
There are a lot of people who would want to go to the store and buy a lottery ticket, even though it is statistically near impossible that you would ever win the lottery. But they're driven by a want to do it. If you flip it, that you have a much greater likelihood to not get it, but it's still not impossible. If you take the vaccine, you should have a similar drive in here to. It's like a mirror image of the math, if that makes sense.
I see it, and I could see that possibly working. What happens with, and I touched on this a bit, as a COVID investigator, my responsibility is to contact new positives, explain their isolation periods, answer any and all questions about COVID-19 recovery, vaccination, treatment, over-the-counter treatment, transmission risk, and then capture their contacts to get to a tracer. So that is I'm the first person they speak to from public health after they've tested positive. So as you can figure, I get a myriad of questions and you have to be able to answer on the spot. And you can't lose them, because if you lose them, they disconnect, you don't get contact. They don't get contacted to let them know that they need to get tested and to isolate and quarantine. So explaining breakthroughs, explaining how the vaccine works. You've got to be able to do that. And what I do is I meet people where they are. My background is in community health. I've had a lot of experience explaining complicated matters of health, primary, secondary, tertiary syphilis, for example, hepatitis, legionellosis, salmonella, and making it plain. So I meet people where they are, and I just do open-ended questions and let them lead the conversation. As their questions bubble up is how I guide them through that process. And with this particular new surge, it's very tricky because people have been immunized, and most of the people here in Virginia have been hearing on the news or hearing in our press conferences from the governor that we're at 70% vaccinated adults in Virginia. Well, that means 70% of the population has at least one dose, maybe two fully vaccinated. So when we're seeing breakthroughs, when seeing surges, it doesn't make sense. And you have to be able to explain that this vaccine was not created to cure, and no immunization has been created for that purpose. We have breakthroughs in all viral preventable vaccinations. They do occur. And then as more people become more vaccinated, more people may experience breakthroughs, but that does not mean that the vaccine is not effective. There's a difference between effectiveness and whether or not the vaccine can prevent. And having to explain that, and having to explain how the vaccine came to be in layman's terms, and not take their time. It is a dance. I do feel I can be critical. I am a Democrat that can be critical. And I can, in my experience, admit that we did not do the education that we needed to do with immunization. We had an immunization hesitance problem prior to COVID-19. We started to see MMR rates fall because people were not getting their children immunized for measles, and we were seeing measles and mumps outbreaks again, and other vaccine preventable diseases as early as 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. We were not seeing people getting those routine immunizations with children. And it wasn't in populations where people were not educated. It was in affluent, educated communities where people were not immunizing their children, signing deemed consents, and having to explain to pediatricians why they need to educate parents who read on or saw on YouTube that these vaccines contained thimerosal, that these vaccines contained mercury, and they were not safe. Minnesota had a huge outbreak of mumps, I believe measles or mumps, a few years ago. So I saw this coming because of my experience with immunizations in children. I knew that this problem existed before. And when we started to roll out this vaccine, I really hoped that we would do the education and explain what it means to have a breakthrough, which isn't even a breakthrough in my experience. In my opinion, it's not a breakthrough. The vaccine's still doing what it's supposed to do. It's preventing death. As we've been seeing new cases rise up in the last few days, where I think our positivity rate right now is about 19%.
Whoa.
Yes, it's getting there. Just in the last 48 hours. This is a fast moving.
That's an astonishingly high, scary number.
Yes. And in the South, it's much worse, 20, 21, 22%. And it's changing because we're doing the science in the middle of it. We're in science right now. We're walking through it, and it's changing moment to moment. So, but as we see that positivity rate goes up, that rate of infection go up, we are also seeing deaths descend, and they are continuing to descend. Mm-hmm. So that shows that the vaccine is preventing death. The problem, though, is that we have a large population of unvaccinated people that are children, and they are not eligible to receive immunizations, and children are dying. We lost a 16-year-old girl 2 days ago in Hampton Roads, a student, a female student, who died from COVID-19 complications. She was unvaccinated. And to me, one child death is too many. So the only way that we can protect the population of children under the age of 13 that cannot be vaccinated is to create bubbles of vaccinated adults and teens around them. But in order to be able to do that, in my opinion, we did not approach COVID-19 from a community perspective. We left it up to individuals and what was best for them. And that is fine when we're dealing with things like heart disease or diabetes. You can decide if you want to take a medication or if you want to treat with exercise and diet. When you're dealing with public health, your decisions affect me and my decisions affect you. Same as with seatbelts, same as with smoking. When we banned indoor smoking, we did not see marches. When we banned indoor smoking, we did not have two sides of that narrative. We knew that secondhand smoke was deadly, and we made that collective decision. And no one said that they're right away because they couldn't light up with their pizza. We
did, but there are many.
To me, we needed to come from that community perspective, and that we needed to meet this as a community. To me, COVID-19 is the worst group project I have ever been a part of in my life. I've done my part, but the final grade depends on all of us. And we failed, in my opinion. We did not get that narrative right from the beginning, and we are paying the price.
Any of that you would like to follow up on, Dr. Varner?
Well, I think I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, so, I'm a libertarian. That's been my philosophy since I was young. And you could describe libertarianism in just one sentence as saying, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. Here's the thing. When you're in a pandemic, it's an abnormal situation, right? We don't usually exist in pandemics, especially not in the modern world, thanks to neoliberal capitalism that's raised living standards in so many places and all this stuff. So it's very alien to us that these diseases go around and just kill people. But when you're in this abnormal situation, all of a sudden breathing can hurt somebody else. All of a sudden the normal things you do can hurt somebody else. And so for me, as a libertarian, my very first reaction when it really sunk in that we were going to have a global pandemic and that these patients were coming to my hospital and this disease was coming to my town was this overwhelming sense of horror that I might inadvertently pass the disease on to somebody else. And that was especially true because we didn't know as much about how to protect ourselves. We heard a lot about the doctors getting sick in China. So there was this, and I was living at my parents' house at the time. The house I'm in right now is a house I bought very quickly once the pandemic kicked into gear because I had to, before the pandemic, I was like coming to town and working and then going and traveling. And so I would just stay at my parents' house and that was all cool. And then of course the pandemic, I couldn't travel, but worse, I was like, I can't actually go home and sit at the dinner table with mom and dad and risk bringing them COVID-19. And so for like a few weeks, we divided the house in two and I wore a mask everywhere except like the bar area. And then I got this, I bought another house and I just left because I had to. But what is so shocking to me is so many people don't have the maturity to recognize that we're in a situation, the pandemic creates a situation where rights conflict with each other. Yeah, you're right. If you have to wear a mask, yeah, that's violating your rights. If business gets closed, violating your rights. If somebody twists your arm and makes you get a vaccine and threat of losing your job, violating your rights. Here's the problem. If you don't do those things, you stand the chance of killing somebody or of landing them in the hospital, and that violates their rights. So we have to deal with this as mature thinkers, where we try to, and all of a sudden, this kind of just one-track thought of, leave me alone, I'm going to do what I want, becomes really antisocial. It's very, very antisocial. And you have to understand that, I would disagree with our friend in the podcast about seatbelts. I don't think we should have seatbelt laws. You get in a car wreck, you hurt you. Now, I make everybody in my car drive with a seatbelt. I will not let somebody be a passenger in my car without a seatbelt because I'm not going to take the risk of being the driver in a fatal accident. But if you want to get in your car and drive down the street without a seatbelt, fine. You know what? It might be an altruistic action because we call people like that organ donors. But the point I'm making is that it's not prejudicial to the rights of others in the same way as, for example, being a nursing home worker who shows up at work unvaccinated, or being somebody who holds a super spreader event,
which is happening.
Yeah, the super spreader events. Have happened and they've been devastating. Or just being somebody who goes out to the bar and then brings the disease home to mom and grandma. I have patients to whom this has happened. People, they get killed by their family members, not intentionally, but they're still dead. And the family members still feel horrible. We have to recognize that and then move forward with that fundamental recognition that rights are in conflict and that a simple "don't violate my rights, bro" attitude fails to take into account the full scope of the things. I would even go so far as to say if a restaurant wants to allow smoking, nobody has to eat there, nobody has to work there. But the problem with COVID-19 is I can't be like, I don't want to go to the businesses that have COVID, right? It circulates. You can even say, we're going to try to protect all of the people in nursing homes. How well did that work? We tried. We locked those nursing homes down. And almost every nursing home in the country had horrible COVID outbreaks.
Mhm.
Not just the places where they sent COVID patients, even the ones that tested everybody on their way in and all this stuff. They couldn't keep it out.
No.
How hard we tried to protect the most vulnerable, we couldn't do it because this just circulates insidiously. And we have to recognize that and then go forward from a place of respect for our neighbors' rights.
Mhm.
Don't hurt people. It means something different in a pandemic than it means on a normal day.
Good points. Good points. Now, I want to chat a little bit about the responses we've seen over the past year or two. And I want to do this right. So, yes, we're going to use hindsight and let's use our combined political philosophies here. So, as a planet, instead of governments from China to the United States on down to states and cities, did we respond in the right way?
Me?
You want to go
Either one. Yeah.
Yes and no. I'm heavy on no, but yes and no. In some ways, yes. In a lot of ways, no. I just want to real quick make a correction. Didn't feel right about that epi number, so I wanted to go back and look at our positivity rate. 7-day positivity rate for Virginia right now, 7.1%, not 17, with 13 to 18 of that being children under the age of 19. The goal is 2%, and we are seeing 20% in the South. I just wanted to make that correction. I expressed already the errors that I feel we made. We should have done PSAs about what vaccinations were, what they could do, how they are created, what's the difference between the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. There are differences. We could have done that. If you can do sex education for middle schoolers, you can do brief, concise morsels of education for vaccines for adults, and you can do them in long form commercials. You can do them in PSAs. There were ways to do it, and I don't think it's just to your point, sir, that you made, because we didn't put out a concise, clear, repeated message, and information flew in conflict of that. It looked like nobody knew what they were doing. No one knew anything, and you lost the public trust. And public trust is essential to public health. If I don't have your trust, then you're not going to believe me when I tell you, hello, I'm in contact with COVID-19. You need to be tested, and you need to quarantine for 14 days. So I don't feel like we did that. I don't feel like we expressed or introduced the concept again as a community. It was a community effort. We left it up to individuals, and that is just not how COVID-19 works. It doesn't matter what you do as a person. If you're going to share public space, we need to have a public approach. What you want to do for yourself is fine as long as you don't plan to leave your home, because it's your private property. But sharing public spaces meant that there was a piece of responsibility involved, and I don't think we honed that in. Mask mandate was great because we needed it. It was our only effective tool at the time. This is not political. This is reality. It was our only distancing, hand washing, masking kept us pretty good. Once we started immunizing people, we got our rates lower, death lower in January, February, March, and then April, May, and June. We saw sustained low death rates. We saw very few breakthroughs. We lifted that mask mandate right before the 4th of July weekend, and it was party mode. People were on flights. Everybody took their mask off, even though that was not the deal. Unvaccinated people were supposed to keep their masks on in public, but no one asked. It was don't ask, don't tell. And here we are. I feel like that was not the way to go. But it's very difficult to explain at the time that fully vaccinated people still needed to keep a mask on. And so, well, I got my shot. Why do I have to keep this mask on? And again, it fell back to not educating what that vaccine does and what it cannot do. Had we done that, we wouldn't have had people in Congress arguing about, why are you still wearing a mask? You're making a spectacle. You're fully vaccinated. We should have explained that the variant was increasing and that we were not sure about the effectiveness of the vaccine against the variant, which the vaccination predated the variant. We did not make the vaccine knowing about the variant. It was made for Alpha COVID-19. We are lucky that it is still effective against this Delta variant. And hopefully we will not create a new variant that our vaccines become useless. That's why the vaccine effort is so important right now. But again, I feel that education was essential. It would have calmed down a lot of the noise. It would have brought us all back to reality. And it would have made some of these debates unnecessary, and no, we could just move on and keep our people safe. But that is solely my opinion. I am, I am liberal. I am a person that thinks as, I have a community mindset. And I think we could have done better there. I think that's just my opinion.
How would you Monday morning quarterback this, Dr. Varner?
Well, interestingly, I don't think I would be as critical of public health as an institution or community, because I guess, I guess I could analyze this in a lot of ways for a lot of different facets of it, but I guess what I would complain about most is that there was a concerted effort to poison the well from the very beginning, from conservative and from libertarian circles. And this is where I've been so vocal, because I'm so outraged that people I've cooperated with, that organizations I've helped build, have engaged in this well poisoning effort against public health voices who are just trying to help save lives in a pandemic, and it outrages me. But we have to think about it this way, okay? So I can open up the New England Journal of Medicine and see their publications about the vaccines or about different discussions about how masks work. And I can read a scientific paper from the perspective of somebody who understands what all those little numbers mean. What does it mean when they say P equals less than 0.001? I know intuitively. What does it mean when they put confidence intervals? They don't even say confidence. They say CI. I know what all that means. All these papers assume a fund of knowledge, medical knowledge, and all this stuff. I mean, I went to school for years for this, and we had continuing throughout residency education about how to read and understand these things critically. Right? And the general public doesn't have that. And I kind of think like, well, what if actually some aliens were bombarding us with like these particles, these quantum particles that randomly killed people, and instead of doctors, we were relying on physicists to talk about how to protect yourself? I'd be in that position then, because while I get a little bit about what relativity is, that's not my wheelhouse, and I can't read a physics paper to save my life. And I would have to. So what position would I be in? I would have to rely on people I trust. And unfortunately, we live in a very polarized society where there are a large number of people who decide who they're going to trust based on whether they agree with them politically. And a lot of people say basically based on whether what they're being told is what they want to hear. And I mean, I have lost friends, I've lost followers, I've lost all these things because I wouldn't tell people what they wanted to hear. So the libertarian line from all the think tanks to me is the media is overblowing COVID-19. It's probably not going to come to the United States. One guy who's pretty well known, named I think his name was Richard Epstein, in the libertarian community, published something in the Wall Street Journal. He said there are not going to be any more than 500 deaths from this disease in the United States. And you got a series of these things where they had a concerted effort to try to lie to the American people and say the mortality rate is extremely low, that it's not very dangerous. They've tried to lie and say that the NPIs are not effective. They've tried to lie and say that the vaccine is dangerous. And so now we have vaccine refusers who, most of whom believe a combination of two things. One, that COVID-19 is not that bad. And number two, that the vaccine is really dangerous. They believe those things. And so obviously they're then going to conclude that they shouldn't take it. Now, the fact that they believe these things is because a group of people told them what they wanted to hear over and over and over again, and we believe things when people tell us what we want to hear. That's, if you look at any libertarian publication, all of the advertisements, almost all of the advertisements are for sketchy investment services. And that's because you tell people what they want to hear. And then you say, by the way, invest in my opportunity. You can reclaim your freedom. Right? I'm sorry to say, but libertarians and conservatives especially are very susceptible to this. And that's why they lose so much money every year to sketchy investment. I mean, they do. You go to Freedom Fest and walk around the vendor's booth. It's crazy. I mean, the kind of crazy investment schemes. They wanted you to buy pink diamonds and this gold fund and that crypto fund, all this crazy stuff. But the answer is that we did that, and then we have people on the right amplifying it and taking up those talking points. Some particular bad actors from the libertarian space have been Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. They've amplified a lot of really just patently false beliefs. And so I wouldn't be so hard on public health. They were trying, and they had this well-voiced, this concerted effort to make people
Lord knows we were trying.
Yeah, because it started with the idea that the political motivations when it started, Trump was president, and if people got afraid of COVID-19 and the economy slowed down, it would harm his reelection chances. So people really wanted to believe the rhetoric that this wasn't so bad. Problem was, it really is so bad. So here we are, and I'm outraged, and it's damaged my ability to work with many libertarians going forward, because I saw that they were willing to lie to people and get them killed for some temporary political gain. And I think that's fundamentally inconsistent with the golden rule of libertarianism. Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. So don't lie to people and get them killed.
Amen.
Before I move on to my next sort of scripted question, I want to speculate here. If you control for everything that the previous president was and only change how he responded to the pandemic, would he still be president? If he was more competent and cautious and not so virulently, to use a virus word, anti-science regarding it?
I don't know, because if he was not so virulently anti-science, to use the buzzword, if he wasn't him, he may have not motivated his base so much. And he's always been a guy who wins based on base turnout. And you never know really where Donald Trump ends and the hateful and vile impulses of his deplorable supporters begin. So it's really hard to separate the man from the man from the movement.
I'd have to agree. I'm trying to imagine a world where he would have done the right thing with this virus. It's just so contrary to his nature. As to me, I've always thought him as someone who is just obsessed, like really drawn to chaos and being controversial and saying things controversial. So I can't even imagine a scenario where he would have said, well, we're going to wear our mask and we're going to shut down these businesses for X amount of days and we'll do virtual learning and we're going to buckle down and it's going to be okay. I don't know. I don't know if that version of him exists.
I mean, I don't know that it's possible because of the political motivations. I mean, there's a reason why in Brazil, Bolsonaro continues being Bolsonaro. It's because he has his base he has to please. He could, for all I know, Donald Trump wanted to do something much differently, but he was pushed by political motivation. That's politicians are always a product of the marketplace. They have to cater to their coalition of people who they want to vote for them. I'll give him credit. I think Operation Warp Speed was a great idea. I'm going to go. When I saw your face, I said, you're going to say something about the messaging. But I think the idea of making advanced purchases on a bet like that, I think the idea of doing the concurrent review of expediting the ability to proceed from phase 1 to phase 2, I always think it was a great idea. And that I mean, I wish we had done challenge trials and we could have had vaccines 6 months earlier, but that's not considered consistent with medical ethics. But I look back and I say maybe we need to change our opinion of what's ethical, because we could have saved millions of lives around the world, and I don't know that that the research ethics that condemn millions of people to death count as ethical in my book. But that's something that we have to have as discussions in medical ethical conferences. And for those who don't know, a challenge trial is basically where you bring people who are immune, who got the vaccine, and then people who haven't got the vaccine or got the placebo, you expose them to the virus and you see who gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's considered unethical. But that's the only way we could have had vaccines sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I'm going to have a question a little later on specific to the different vaccines. But if I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that mRNA vaccines have been worked on for many years prior to COVID coming around.
Vaccines? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, like 30 years.
So they had like a fundamental groundwork going before they did Warp Speed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It's not like some brand new technology. I mean, they were like Moderna was working on a cancer drug where they were going to make these.
That's right.
Physically custom vaccines against cancer. So the idea, and they're still working on it, right, is that you would send a piece of your tumor or your cancer to Moderna. They would analyze it, and then they would make a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine customized to your tumor, send it back, you'd get it. And then, if all went well, your immune system would attack your tumor, and you'd, maybe not have cancer after a while. And so Moderna was like, hey, we're making these custom vaccines, so we've got this way to roll out a vaccine quickly. And then they got the sequence of the coronavirus, and boom, boom, boom. They had their prototype, and that's the vaccine they're using today.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring back the idea of, unless I was about to cut you off, Cindy.
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about Warp Speed, because that was the ironic part of the Trump presidency. Warp Speed was a success. That's full stop. It was a success. Full stop. And they did not capitalize on it. I never understood why conservatives would take their network, their baby Fox News, and use it to downplay the vaccine when Warp Speed was a shining success. I never understood what the end game was with that, because they would talk about, they don't give Donald Trump the credit he deserves for Warp Speed. Like, well, you're making it so that they can't give him credit because you're going on the air with vaccines, but fully vaccinated DNA, you signed off. You have to have it in order to get into the Fox News building in New York, fully vaccinated, telling people to mistrust the vaccine, but also wanting people to give Donald Trump credit. I never understood. I always thought that was so ironic that would be that way. But I could. That was all. That's what the face was when you said.
It's not. I mean, so there's an argument to be made that like they, saying Warp Speed, we're going to develop these really fast, could sow mistrust because the people are like, but you developed this really fast. How do I know it's safe? Right. So there's an argument to be made that like the marketing about making it fast might have on the margin influenced some people to be hesitant. That's an argument you could make, and I don't know if I would buy it. I mean, we needed it to be fast. That's just like reality. We needed it to be fast.
Yeah.
I can't help but think. I remember that Donald Trump was on Twitter very upset that the trial results were released a few days after the election. He accused Moderna, Pfizer of holding on to the results. Right, and that wasn't true because we know when the data monitoring board notified the company and then when they went public with it, it just happened to be that way. But if they had results 2 weeks before the election, by the way, that could have led to Trump winning. But then I think maybe that would have created the incentive for the right to get very excited and buy into the vaccines, and then they would have to have buyer's regret later if they wanted to go against them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Basically sounds like he just shot himself in the foot.
The point that we're making here, we live in a society that is too politicized because now we're having this entire conversation about the political motivations of people with respect to health policy. And it's really unfortunate because we're not, I mean, we should be talking about like, how do we prevent people from getting COVID-19? How do we get people vaccinated? How do we make sure that we come out the other end of this pandemic with a body count as low as possible? And also, how do we weigh that against the trade-offs, the costs, even the human costs of NPIs? Like, we can't have this conversation in America today where we say NPIs are necessary. NPIs have a human cost. We have to address those, and we have to weigh them, and we have to talk about this like mature adults. And we can't worry about the political implications of what somebody's base and donors are going to think. And I'm going to disconnect and reconnect for a sec.
Yeah, I noticed you froze again, too. But at least we could hear you.
Was there a question for me, or was this when I cut you off, you cut me off? No, you're about to ask a question.
No, I had a prepared question that was about to be about measuring libertarianism and the philosophy against things beyond just masks and drugs and social welfare and stuff. But he is
That's
back
a question
on.
for the good doctor.
All right, so we're back. You were right in the middle of a point, so I want you to come back with your point if you had it.
The point I was making is that if we're going to talk about policy related to public health or the pandemic, and this is really a broader point about politics, right? Politics infects everything when decisions are political. And that's a shortcoming of politics. And there's an entire theory of economics that studies it called public choice theory. And so our conversation just now has basically been an exploration of public choice theory with regard to pandemic responses. And so we should think about that and address that and figure out ways that we can depoliticize these things. And what mechanisms could we take to take the decisions out of the hands of politicians and put them into the hands of people who don't have political motivations? And I mean, I'd like to see also what can we do to get people to make put their money behind the predictions that they make that underlie their policy recommendations. Libertarians and conservatives sang the praises of Sweden in the beginning of the pandemic. Now, the right way to judge Sweden is by its neighbors, Norway, Finland, Denmark, right? Well, if you judge it that way, Sweden dramatically underperformed. They had the bigger drop in GDP than their Nordic neighbors did, suggesting that the NPIs of the Nordic neighbors actually may have preserved some GDP for them. They had way more deaths per capita. So that means, the Swedish response to COVID killed a bunch of Swedish people. And what I would have liked to have seen is if in the beginning of the pandemic, you were going to start saying Sweden's the way to go. I remember saying, well, they might have a little more death now, but they're going to have herd immunity in 2 months.
No.
No, they didn't. Today, they're doing the same thing. So Sweden's having very few deaths. And first of all, if I look at their cases and their deaths, I really think they're underreporting their deaths right now. And I don't, that'll come to light. That'll work its way out because we'll look at like all-cause mortality statistics, for example, and we'll be like, hey, your all-cause mortality is way up, but you didn't have any COVID deaths. What are you guys doing over there in Sweden?
Fudging.
But the bottom line is that if people would make, and I wrote to Predict It, which is a betting website with prediction markets. And they're run by a university, and they do a lot of political prediction markets where people bet on their predictions. And I said, I think you guys should open markets related to the COVID-19 pandemic because I think that you're going to get better information from prediction markets about what's likely to happen in the future. And then policymakers can use that to be informed. And they responded to me that they had ethical concerns about betting on a pandemic. But for example, if people wanted to say that Sweden had herd immunity in May or April of last year, whatever, then those people should go to some betting exchange and place a bet on, for example, the number per capita mortality of Sweden 6 months from now. Let's see them put their money where their mouth is. Let's see if they really believe that. If you believe the vaccine is going to kill off a bunch of people, why don't you go place a bet saying that something is going to be it's going to be withdrawn from the market within a year. Let's see you put your money behind that. People won't put their money behind things they don't actually believe. So I believe really strongly in prediction markets as ways to cut through the crap. And I wish if I could Monday morning quarterback something, I wish we had the gambling houses, the betting houses in England probably would have been the best ones to do this because they have the biggest global reach. But I wish the gambling houses in England had opened a lot of gambling propositions on things having to do with COVID-19. And I think we could have, because prediction markets produce really good probabilities. You can deduce from that what the market thinks the probability of an outcome is. And if you can figure out what the market thinks the probability of an outcome is, the quality of your decisions going forward become much, much higher.
That's an interesting topic, perhaps for another day. I'm curious that we did touch on sort of libertarianism when it comes to vaccines and masks, but what about the COVID response from a regulatory aspect toward private lives and private businesses? And I also had the part here of how much we invested in the drugs and vaccines from a government spending aspect and how much we invested as government spending to help prop people up because we were about to have a massive contraction. So does that fly in the face of libertarianism, all of that?
Kind of, sort of. Sometimes I think you have to go back to what I said at the beginning, that there's an abnormal situation, an emergency situation. Ayn Rand was very clear when she talked about ethics that there are everyday ethics and there are emergency ethics. The everyday ethics are to avoid an emergency, but when you have an emergency, different rules apply. And I think we are clearly in an emergency situation, and so I don't think we can look at all the policies through a strict libertarian prism because of, as I mentioned, how these rights start to come into conflict with each other. So here's what I would say broadly. If you want to, I think it's really clear that NPIs have been helpful. My review of the literature about NPIs, and that's, for those of you who are wondering, that means lockdowns. Lockdowns is a pejorative term for NPIs. NPIs means non-pharmaceutical interventions. I refuse to call them lockdowns, just like I refuse to call undocumented people in the United States illegal aliens. If you look at that, what they say is that NPIs preventing large group gatherings have a large effect. NPIs preventing things like moderate-sized gatherings have a moderate effect. And then NPIs having an effect on high-risk interactions have a small to moderate effect. Stay-at-home orders actually have a very small effect. That's the literature that I've read. That's basically my summary of it. And I think ideologically motivated people can probably come down, can probably find evidence that contradicts me in both directions. So if you're somebody who really believes in very strict NPIs, that's your opinion, like we should have been at stay-at-home orders for 6 months or a year or something, then you're going to probably try to find evidence to support that. You'll probably point to things like, how did Wuhan get out of the situation they were in? And if you're somebody who doesn't like NPIs at all, we're going to probably be able to find some different data to suggest that NPIs didn't help. I guess I would say that NPIs were a bet. So there were there were a few benefits to NPIs, but there were some benefits that didn't matter about whether we got a vaccine. So those benefits were the fact that, let's say, because everybody was saying, or a lot of people were saying at the beginning, well, we're going to all get it one day. Why don't I just get it over with? And my answer to that is because if you get it 6 months or a year from now, doctors will be better at treating it. Because we learned a lot about the different treatment strategies. Mortality in the hospital went way down because we learned how to save people's lives with this new disease we've never seen before. So you generally want to postpone getting a disease. So if it's true that we'll all get it, I'd like to postpone that time as long into the future as possible. So right up where you can see that we would have an overall mortality benefit, right? Because to me, the big debate that could be had between serious people is, well, you may delay cases, but you're not going to change overall mortality because something's got to get through the society, and you're going to have, at the end of the day, before herd immunity is reached, the same number of infections under NPIs or not under NPIs. So that's why I said, in a way, NPIs, especially for places like Australia and New Zealand, which have had very strict NPIs and which have done things I would really object to, like telling people they can't leave. I don't think that's rationally related to protecting the country. You could easily say you could leave and come back, but there's a quarantine and things like that. I don't think there's risk of meaningful spread when you quarantine travelers coming back. But what I'm saying is that Australia and New Zealand paid a huge cost, way bigger than just about anywhere else in the world in terms of their economic impact of their NPIs, right? And they've really upset a lot of people in their countries, and they've really trampled on a lot of people. But they've also had, statistically speaking, almost no deaths from COVID-19. Very, very few deaths from COVID-19. So in that way, the Australians and New Zealanders are very lucky. They haven't had that death. But there is no way they could have kept those NPIs forever. There's no way they can keep those NPIs forever. They will run out of money. Their population will run out of patients. They are running out of patients. That's why they have the military on the street in Sydney right now, because the population has run out of patients. And so that was a bet on a vaccine coming in time. And where Australia botched it is they botched the vaccine rollout. They were like, we're going to develop our own Australian vaccine. And then they screwed up. It caused false positive HIV tests. They scrapped that, and then they couldn't get in line to buy the shots soon enough. And I mean, it's been a comedy of errors in terms of their vaccine rollout. And that would be my biggest criticism of Australia, right? Because they can't lift their NPIs in any meaningful way until they've got 90+% vaccination. But when they do, they can probably go back to an approach of contact tracing and pretty much just resume normal life if they have a 90% vaccination rate. I think that it wouldn't be able to meaningfully circulate in a way that would threaten very many people. And then Australia and New Zealand will go down as the country that paid monetarily for COVID-19, but did not pay in human lives. A lot of libertarians, a lot of conservatives are really big on criticizing Australia and New Zealand. But I wish I could pay monetarily instead of in human lives. I really wish I could. I mean, there are a lot of patients I've taken care of who'd be alive today if we did what Australia and New Zealand had done. And by the way, I probably would have opposed it because I didn't know what was coming. Like in hindsight, I don't see how you can criticize it. It's like, if you applied the mortality rate of the United States to Australia's population, and you subtract their actual mortality, like so it would say expected versus observed, if Australia had just been the USA, we're talking about like 120,000 mortalities. So there are probably 120,000 Australians walking around complaining about lockdowns today. And what a privilege it is. They get to complain about lockdowns instead of being dead at 6 feet under the ground. That can't be understated. How many children did not lose a parent? Yes, and instead maybe they incurred debts, lost jobs, had hardships. I'm not saying, and there are going to be human tolls, people who committed suicide, substance abuse issues, deaths of despair. There are going to be that. And but I'm pretty darn sure that the deaths of despair aren't going to reach nearly what COVID-19 deaths would have.
I want to touch on here. I'd imagine in your fields, and when you're there's a nice cute dog.
This is he's sitting on my lap because he's just like a libertarian. If I put him on the floor, he'll be destructive.
I imagine in the past year plus, you guys have been dealing with people who are skeptics on things even as simple as masks. But you could probably convince them that something like this could work because of its effect on other diseases, like flu going down. Could you guys touch on that?
I mean, yeah, it's clear we've seen next to no influenza all over the world. And I think that's because of masks, right? And masks work better to control the spread of influenza than they do with COVID-19 because the R naught of influenza is lower than the R naught of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to think that that masks are ineffective. They are simply not as effective as we want them to be. their mitigation strategy. I mean, you can't go around saying, well, I've got a mask, I can do whatever I want now. No, that's not good. But should people be wearing masks? Yes, I still wear a mask. I go out in public, I wear a mask. I go to the grocery store, I wear a mask, even though we don't have a mask mandate. People look at me like I'm crazy. But they're the crazy ones going around without a mask, risking other people. I mean, that's how I see it.
You probably see that a lot around Virginia too, Sandy.
I could not agree to that more. I think that we're at the point in this pandemic where the science from last year is available. The science from this winter is available, from this past flu season, comparable to 2019, 2018. Everyone's been saying, isn't it weird that I didn't get a cold last year? Like, it's not weird.
Yeah.
We wore masks. We washed our hands. We had hand sanitizer everywhere. We were not in places longer than we needed to be, including doctor's visits or office visits. You did not wait in a waiting room next to sick people. You waited outside. You got a text message when it was time to come in, when it was your turn. We didn't do unnecessary appointments. We did telehealth. We did a lot of things. We didn't have kids in school with runny noses and then coming home and then mom's sick and then dad's sick. Everybody sick. We did a lot last year. So these efforts are effective, and it was obvious with, our lower numbers in communicable diseases across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a cold, flu, or anything. I used to get sick all the time. I was always
here.
I was getting, every seasonal virus. I haven't had since the beginning of the pandemic. I haven't had anything, and that's pretty astonishing. And so I actually think, people make this claim all the time. Well, it's just another flu. We never treat the flu like this, and obviously it's worse than the flu. So there's a reason. But maybe we should start thinking or rethinking the way we treat the flu. Mm-hmm. Maybe flu season should be everybody put your damn mask on season.
Yep.
Maybe we should have a stronger system of incentivizing influenza vaccinations. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think we should implement NPIs for flu season because it's a seasonal thing and we can't function as society with NPIs a few months out of every year. But should people put on masks during flu season? I think so. Should we test and contact trace flus like we do COVID-19? Probably. I mean, right before the pandemic, one of my partners in my medical practice got influenza. We were working out of the same office, sitting next to each other. And she tested positive. And while she was sitting there, she was sitting next to me all day. She developed a fever. She went down to the ER and took a flu test, came back to our office. Then it turned positive. And the very first thing I did was pick up the phone, call the pharmacy, and got myself some Tamiflu, and I never got right. And obviously, I was very lucky to have had that prolonged exposure to flu in a hospital with somebody willing to go get a flu test really fast, right? And then the ability to prescribe myself Tamiflu. We should try to think about how we can make flu a thing of the past. I think that's a really, really worthy goal. I mean, every year I see a few people, on ventilators face down. And by the way, that's when I say face down on a ventilator, I'm talking about somebody whose oxygenation is so low that to bring it up, you have to put them, you have to give them drugs that paralyze them, and then you have to put them face down. It's the outcomes associated with it are horrible. Right? All kinds of things. If you survive, you have myopathies and neuropathies. It's just it's a horrible way to suffer. And I don't want that for anybody, but a lot of COVID patients end up face down on the ventilator, and it's the worst way to die. And I hate that.
I think we might touch on that in just one of the upcoming questions in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about the types of vaccines that there are and how do each of them work compared to each other, and how effective are they compared to the vaccines for other diseases, if we have enough data to compare them. Whoever wants to go first.
You go first.
Okay, so,
question.
All right. So we've got two types of vaccines available in the United States. We got an mRNA vaccine and we got a viral vector vaccine. mRNA vaccines are the new ones. They're the Cadillacs of COVID vaccines. If you get your choice of COVID vaccines, you get a Pfizer or Moderna. There's no better or worse one between those, except for the conditions that you have to store that. I'm sorry, my puppy is biting my hands. He's very much a little libertarian, biting me. But anyway, so then you've got the viral vector vaccine. It's one shot. It's your Johnson and Johnson, and you don't have as high of efficacy. But you only have to take one shot, so people find that convenient. Now, outside the United States, you've got other vaccines, right? You've got AstraZeneca, which is a 2-shot viral vector vaccine. Mm-hmm. Then you've got, I'm going to hate myself for saying this, but what I think one of the most, besides mRNA vaccines, probably the most clever and ingenious vaccine is Sputnik. So Sputnik is a viral vector vaccine, an adenovirus vector vaccine, but it uses 2 different adenovirus vectors for the different shots. And the advantage of this is that one of the reasons you might see like second shots not working as well as first shots is because you develop an immunity to the adenovirus vector. And so you don't really get the exposure to the antigen like you're supposed to. So the Russians overcame that. And I mean, I don't know if the data they publish out of Russia is reliable. I don't know that they have a culture of sunshine and accountability and independent data monitoring boards. Maybe they do. Maybe if I understood the way they do things in Russia, maybe I'd trust them. I don't know. I mean, the efficacy data for Sputnik is almost as good as the efficacy data for the mRNA vaccines. There's a reason to believe Sputnik might be best of everything except an mRNA vaccine. But I have trust issues. I guess, I have trust issues with something that comes from the land of Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. And with issues of things like corruption and political influence of their scientific process. That being said, I've advised close friends of mine outside the United States who've had a choice between various vaccines to choose Sputnik, when they couldn't get Pfizer or Moderna. I would put Sputnik as right behind Pfizer or Moderna and above AstraZeneca. Now, Novavax, I haven't looked so closely because it's just not really available for anybody where I would put it in there. And then you've got these like killed virus vaccines coming out of China, and the data behind them is not so good. And you're getting 50-60% relative risk reductions of infection, just not so good. And they've used a lot of that in Ecuador, and it's unfortunate that they had to because they couldn't get supplies of better vaccines. They used a lot of that in Chile, and I believe that that's why Chile had high vaccination rates, but still, pretty bad surges before Delta even came along. And that's because their use of the Chinese vaccines that just aren't as effective, Sinopharm and Sinovac. There are a few others. There's one coming out. There's one that was made in Cuba. Nobody knows how that works. You can't trust, in my opinion, you can't trust science coming out of Cuba. Anyway, that's my take on the global panorama of vaccines. And maybe I used some words people didn't. So if you ask me to clarify anything you want.
Well, I hadn't heard of Sputnik since civics class, and now I know it has another meaning. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, the Sputnik vaccine is very cheap. They're able to mass manufacture it and in a lot of ways, and it's actually in the developing world. I think it's making a big difference. And we can't manufacture enough Pfizer and Moderna to vaccinate the world, and we're going to have to have it's going to have to be an effort with AstraZeneca and with Sputnik and even with Sinopharm and Sinovac.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch on another buzzword that is recent breakthroughs. Sandy, could you talk to me a bit about what that is and how we're dealing with it?
Well, a breakthrough, in layman's terms, is someone who is fully vaccinated, and we're talking about someone who received 1 or 2 doses, whether Johnson & Johnson 1 dose appropriately, or 2 doses at the right time frame, either 21 days apart or 4 weeks apart, depending on vaccine. Fully vaccinated and then past the 6-week period. There is a 6-week period after you receive the vaccine where you're still open to infection. And then at that point, you're considered fully vaccinated. And then also contracting the virus that the vaccine was preventing. We call it a breakthrough. I don't like the word, but it's what we're using right now, and it's very troubling with how many we're seeing. But it is because we are seeing that increase in people who are getting vaccinated. So as that increases, then we can expect to see that proportion also increase. Again, it does not speak to the effectiveness of the vaccine. It's just because more people are becoming vaccinated, becoming fully vaccinated, then we're seeing more breakthroughs, but it does not speak to effectiveness. We say, it doesn't, it's still that we have that less than 1% population who are fully vaccinated that are in the hospital. We're 99% of hospitalized people for COVID are unvaccinated. So we're still seeing that hold. And we're very lucky, in fact, because viruses are very clever. They tend to adapt quickly, and we're lucky that we're still seeing effectiveness in our vaccines currently, and that they're still available, and we have enough doses, and they're free.
I think we're likely to see high effectiveness throughout any more variants that come along. And the reason I think that is because these vaccines, the vaccine doesn't make your body produce one antibody. It makes your body produce a range of antibodies against spike proteins.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the spike protein can mutate, yes, but if it mutates enough to evade all those antibodies, it probably can't bind to the ACE receptors in your lungs. So we're looking at something where it's just kind of like it would be really hard to completely evade. Now we might find create more breakthroughs, but not something that fundamentally alters the calculus. Where I don't think we're ever going back to a world where we feel unprotected at all. Like I feel like when I go to work, like, hey, I got the Pfizer vaccine, so I'm less likely. Like I'm going to follow all the rules, wear all the PPE, and then I'm very unlikely to get infected. And if I do get exposed, I've got a really good chance of not getting it because of the vaccine. If I do get it, I'm probably not going to get as sick as I would have. So like I feel like there are still those layers of protection, and they're not going away. Because I don't think it's kind of physiologically possible. At the same time, I hope that the mRNA vaccine producers create some more, variant-specific boosters. Although I'd love to just take a third dose of Pfizer, but
I was going to ask your opinion of boosters. I saw a study recently that Moderna is looking to recommend a boost for immune-compromised Americans, particularly elderly people who have comorbidity. They're seeing robust response with white blood cells, and I just wanted your opinion about that.
So one of the things the early data, like Israel says, that the more your vaccine, your quantitative antibody titers are, the more likely a breakthrough is for you. And we know that a third dose raises your antibody titers. So we have a really strong reason to believe that a third dose will give you additional protection. And so I'd like that additional protection. Now, here's why I don't think we should roll out a third dose in the United States right now. And that's because there are like billions of people in the world who don't have the opportunity today of getting the first dose or the second dose. Should we eventually go to third doses? Yes. But right now, there are people who need them more than me. And so you see the benefit I'm going to get. It's like you get about 50%, you get about 60% of the benefit of the vaccine from getting the first shot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to get like another 30% of the benefit from the second shot. And I think you're going to get another like 5 or 10% from the third shot, right? You're going to get diminishing returns the more shots you get. And so why would I use shots to get diminishing returns here in North America when there are still people who haven't had their shots somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
That's how I look at it.
No, I completely agree. I think it's something that it's good that it's an option, but I think winter is when we should look at it.
And I mean, we're manufacturing so much that it's not going to be long before globally vaccines are basically universally available. COVAX, I mean, this is one of those other things where I say, like, yeah, I depart from libertarian orthodoxy. COVAX is a great thing. COVAX is a program that is administered by an international agency, right? The countries that are wealthy are donating vaccines to give to countries that aren't wealthy. And that's very important because, as we know, variants come up, they come out of different places. We're not safe if we just vaccinate ourselves. We actually have to end the pandemic. We have to vaccinate the whole world. And so wealthy countries are the ones with the economic power to fund that. I do not expect Bolivia or Ecuador or Mexico to fund their own vaccination campaigns. They won't do it. They won't be able to.
I don't want to let this go by without I'm bringing up with this comment here. This is following up on a relative comparison of healthcare systems because I think Cuba was mentioned regarding their vaccine. But my fiance, Andrea Dixon, said, I think CU's for Cuba here has a better ranking in healthcare than America. I think that is the year-to-year World Health Organization, the different measurements that they have of all the systems.
Yeah, I think the data that they're basing that on is, quite frankly, fabricated. We didn't talk about this in the beginning of the show, but I'm very active in humanitarian medicine in Latin America. And I do a lot of international work, and I work a lot with Cuban expats. And that has led me to getting involved in medical dramas within Cuba. I remember trying just about 9 months ago, jumping through so many hoops to get a very cheap but necessary breast cancer medication to a woman in Cuba because they couldn't get it. And if you talk to actual Cubans, and I also, by the way, in medical school had some of the doctors who were teaching me were originally from Cuba, so they were able to tell me how things were. They have a few very big fancy hospitals, and then they have what is for everybody else, and it's really poor care. It's quality conditions, and it's my dog is biting my hands, and I won't let him on the floor. But anyway, the conditions, the real conditions in Cuba, I think, are really horrible. Another example is at the beginning of the pandemic, a bunch of Chilean political activists got trapped in Cuba, and they were begging Sebastian Piñera, please bring us out of here. We don't have health care. We don't have this. Because the reality is that Cuba has excellent health care for the elite, and then really squalid conditions for everybody else. I think that's the reality. That's the reality that I've come to know from people who know. And I think that Cuba's healthcare gets praised for political reasons, but that what's happened in Cuba has been a tremendous loss of liberty and loss of life and suffocation of the dreams of millions of Cubans because of the Castrista dictatorship. And I think that it's really unfortunate that people who are progressives but not actually communists, social democrats, if you will, in the United States, who want to take up the cause of Cuba, because Cuba is a place where human rights don't exist. Cuba is a place where people suffer terribly. Cuba is not a place we should want to emulate. And if you talk about Cuba having a great healthcare system, you're going to have people think, well, I hope we don't get a great healthcare system. And you get a great healthcare system by having economic. You get a great healthcare system by having an economic system in your country that promotes the production of great wealth, and then that wealth can be invested. But if you don't produce that wealth to begin with, there's just no way to create a great healthcare system. We have problems in the US, in Europe, in Canada with inequity in access. We have problems with coverage access. I'm not going to deny that. But at the end of the day, we have tremendous resources. Why do we never we seldom run out of ventilators even during the pandemics? Because our country is so wealthy. We have a federal stockpile of ventilators because we can think about eventualities like this and invest. And that's only thanks to the fact that we're wealthy. I've talked to people in Colombia, in Venezuela, in Mexico, all of whom during this pandemic have been running around trying to find oxygen. I don't know why. Look at it. I'm sorry. I promise you, I'm not torturing him. Look. I don't know. He's just upset because
you're not paying attention to him.
No, I know. I'm talking. He's bite my hands and play.
Oh.
So anyway, the point is that we have to actually focus on wealth creation if we want to make a great healthcare system possible. And Cuba hasn't done that. And I have, yeah, I'm sorry for the long rant, but I think that what's happening in Cuba is a real shame with real terrible human consequences.
I think she rebutted midway through that. Just I want to give her air here. So
Sure, Andrea, you're right. Cuba, yeah, there are problems in the United States, but the reality is that an uninsured child with cancer can walk into Johns Hopkins and get emergency Medicaid and get covered and treated for their cancer. And the reality is that in the United States, even though we have access problems and even though we have inequities, the level of access and the level of care you can get is night and day. If you have stroke symptoms, you will get an MRI very quickly in the vast majority of the United States, including in the safety net hospitals, with the exception of a few rural hospitals that don't have that machine. And if the MRI is really necessary, they'll ship you to another hospital where it's available. Again, I'm not trying to say our system is great, but I mean, if you want to see what a hospital in a developing country looks like, they don't have private rooms. They have cots, 30 of them in a line. You go to the bathroom right there on your cot in front of everybody. Infectious diseases spread in those places like crazy because you've got 30 sick people in a room. The hospital doesn't serve food. Your family has to bring it. If you want blood, your family has to find a blood donor. They don't have a blood bank. You want a CT scan. Well, you might have to go to another hospital down the road. That's the reality of hospitals in a developing country, conditions that nobody in a wealthy country has to deal with. And I'm not just saying the United States, nobody in Canada, nobody in Western Europe, nobody in Taiwan, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. Nobody in these countries has to deal with the kind of squalid, terrible, low quality care conditions that we see very commonly in developing countries. And the simple fact of the matter is that's because in wealthy countries, the money exists. Mm-hmm. You can't distribute something that doesn't exist. You have to have the money before you can argue over how it gets spent. And that's been my experience, having seen the inside of hospitals in Ghana, in Uganda, in Colombia, by video inside Venezuela, in Mexico, and I've seen wonderful private hospitals in Mexico, yes, but I've also seen the public ones, and they're not nice places. It's all about the money, and if you don't have the money, then it's not possible to build the kind of high quality, high technology care that we hope and we want everybody in the world to one day have access to. I'm gonna disconnect and reconnect because my camera's.
Yeah, I noticed that he's about to drop off. We'll get back on. Now, Miss Sandy, I don't want to go too much past an hour and a half because we're within a few minutes of that. I'll mention that when Mr. Kyle comes back on too. But I will give you the floor here to start off on what will be sort of like the closeout. So your idea looking forward on the premise of something like kids in school needing to be masked up and people who are still hesitant to take vaccines and have reasons for it. Wrap it all together and how you would try to convince them.
My main point would be to reiterate again that the vaccine is safe and effective and available. That is one of the things that I make sure to say on every call before they can pique my knowledge or try to rebut or refute or debate me. I make sure to tell them, like, this is not something that we are hoping to be true. We have the data to support this now, that the vaccine is safe and effective. Even against the Delta variant, that breakthroughs are not uncommon and they happen in nearly all viral immunizations. As the segment of the population of vaccinated people increases, then breakthroughs will also increase, but that does not speak to effectiveness of the vaccine, and mortality remains low. Again, I try to keep my numbers up when I'm on the phone. The goal is 2% positivity. Our 7-day positivity rate was 7.1. 13 to 18-year-olds mean the largest portion of that. 13 to 18% are children under the age of 19, sorry. And that these children are at risk because they cannot be immunized, children under the age of 13. It is not true that children are not affected. I'm seeing more symptoms in children. I'm seeing children having more appearances in ERs and having to be admitted into hospitals. This is not something we're seeing it nationally, we're seeing it statewide, and we're seeing it in our region. Not only does public health depend upon mask wearing, vaccination, hand washing, social distancing, our economy depends on it. A lot of our economy is dependent upon whether or not schools will be open in the fall without disruption. Disruption in schools typically means that one or more parents will have to return home, and people are working jobs where teleworking is not an option. Prevention is cost effective. A mask costs more than the 7-day cost of a ventilator. And that we can show now with data that these prevention methods are effective and available. We are still doing everything we can to keep morbidity low, and it remains low. I think around March 29, we were seeing 80 deaths. Now we're seeing less than 10. And that continues. That spike hasn't rose above 20 since May 28th of this year for our state. So we're still seeing low death. And that has not spiked as the new cases have increased. I also want to caution people to not take our technologies for granted. We do have things now for people who are positive and cannot seroconvert, cannot break symptoms, still have 10, 14 days of high fevers without it breaking, without fever reducing medication. We have treatment now. People can go into ERs and receive plasma donations or treatment that way from people who have donated plasma, for people who are long haulers. So we have done good work. We've worked hard to educate the public, but there's still more work to do. If you are sick and you are in the hospital, you cannot be vaccinated. A vaccine will not relieve your symptoms. That is something that I'm hearing more and more. Unfortunately, I'm getting calls. Well, I'm calling my patients and they are admitted in the hospital. They want to know that, well, if I got the vaccine now, would my symptoms resolve? And that is, the answer to that is no. So we're working very hard to make sure people are educated about this pandemic. I didn't think I would live in a pandemic in my lifetime. We predicted, we prepared, we did it with SARS, we did it with MERS, as the doctor said, but this is not something that I thought I would experience, even with all my experience in public health and all my studies. There's still more work to do, and I'll be on the phones 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much for that. And Andrea also agrees. Thank you for what you've been doing. And I'm glad you were able to join us tonight, Miss Sandy. And we'll see you down the line. Perhaps another future Beach Brothers show. So stick around down.
Yes, one where I'm sharper. I'm sorry, I'm so fuzzy. I'm a long way from my last cup of coffee. It was hours ago.
Good work, because the contact tracing, the public health outreach to these individuals is crucial, and you're saving lives with your work. You have my hat goes off to you for that. Thank you. And,
thank you.
We're both kind of soldiers in this battle, and so we're going to keep at it until it's over.
Right. Well, you probably have early work in the morning, so I just want to hope you have a great night, Miss Sandy. I'll catch you next time.
All right. Take care.
Now, Dr. Kyle, before you head away too, I want to give you that same final question regarding kids who might need to mask up going to schools and people who are trepidatious about taking vaccine, what would be your final opinion, your final pitch to get them to get over that fear?
All right. So I don't really have anything to say to people who are unvaccinated at this point, because I don't think that I mean, if they want to ask me questions because they trust me and they weren't sure, I can talk to them. This is highly effective. It's extremely safe. It can save your life. There's not a lot more to say beyond that. But the reality is that argument ain't going to fly with the majority of the people who aren't vaccinated right now, because the vaccine's been available and they've chosen not to take it, and they've been drawn in by a dialogue about the pandemic that is false from the beginning, saying that the pandemic is not real, that the virus doesn't pose a threat to people, saying that the vaccine is dangerous. So they've been drawn in by this, and they don't trust me. On Twitter, they call me a Fed. So they don't trust me. They're not going to believe me. So at this point, there's not a lot that I can do, except that I can advocate for the business community to begin requiring it. And in fact, I just got a notification today that my hospital is going to require it of employees. Many, many healthcare employers are starting to require it. And I think that's a great way to start boosting the vaccine. At the end of the day, this will not end until more than 90% of people are vaccinated. I'm a fan, not fan, but I should say I liked the Wall Street Journal op-ed that the governor of Alabama wrote, and what she said on TV, which was, it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated. And the fact that we're in the midst of another wave, that this is happening, that all these people are dying, it's because of misinformation that's led a lot of people to refuse to get vaccinated. And at this point, persuasion is not going to work anymore. So now we need to turn to the business community, and we need to tell the business community it's time to get very serious. You've got to stop employing and stop serving the unvaccinated, because the alternative is that the government, they'll start with local and then it'll become state, and then the CDC will probably impose something at a federal level that is going to be something like a vaccine passport. And that's going to really suck. And the ratchet effect will be on full display. The government will take powers that we don't want them to take and have, and they'll never give them back. We can avoid that in one way, which is by using our own power as individuals and as business owners in the market, the power of the market, to tell these people who haven't gotten vaccinated that their behavior is unacceptable, that they're imposing pandemic conditions on the rest of us. And we can modify their behavior by making their interaction with others conditioned upon them being vaccinated. And I think we can do it. And I think the free market, the private solution can work. But if we don't get on top of it, we're going to lose the opportunity, and the government will act. A lot of libertarians think they can tell lies about the severity of the pandemic. They can tell lies about the risks of the vaccine, and they can screech like, my freedom, and somehow they're going to stop the government from doing what they're going to do. That's not how it works. This will end with greater than 90% of people vaccinated. One way or the other, we can get there without ceding power to the government, or the government can take the power and then they'll never give it back. So I would advocate very stridently that now's the time for corporate America to get to work. And that means that don't employ the unvaccinated and don't serve them. And I would say, especially airlines, you've got to stop transporting and employ unvaccinated passengers. Cinemas, restaurants, bars, banks, hospitals. If it was up to me, we would go many steps farther than just requiring employees to be vaccinated. We would say that to visit somebody in the hospital, you have to show proof of vaccination. We would say that to have an elective medical procedure, you have to show proof of vaccination. These are ideas that right now are considered too radical. But if these kinds of things aren't done voluntarily by private businesses today, the government will do them. in a matter of a couple of months. So we have to act to get the vaccination levels up before the government uses that as a reason to take power, and they'll never give it back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely want to thank you for bringing your both experience and your expert opinion on what you've seen throughout the past couple of years here to the show. It's great. I enjoyed it. It's fun also. I would encourage you, if you have a couple minutes after the show, perhaps to the comments that may be on the thread, to maybe individually respond to them. But otherwise, it just passed about midnight on my side, so I will be bidding you adieu. And I do wish you have a great evening. And perhaps we might have you on again, just talk other versions of politics down the line.
I would love to. This was a delightful conversation. Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it, and I hope we can do it again.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Varner, and I'll catch you next time. All right, now this has been a pretty good episode of Free Friday, in my opinion, here on the Beach Brothers Show. If you'd like to join us on a Free Friday in the future, just message me, Conrad Chazvarner, and we'll set it up. And I hope you all have a great Friday night and a fantastic weekend. Now, I'll close on the words of our other great Beach Brothers, Jose and Seiko. Take care.
It's never too early or too late to plan for retirement. Let me show you how to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your assets from loss due to catastrophic decisions that may affect you the rest of your life. Please call me.
This show was brought to you by Positive Vibes Incorporated, our consulting services. We do credit fixes, we do tax resolution, we lend private money, and debt consolidation. So if you need some of these services, we're waiting here for you. Credit fixes, tax resolutions, private money, and debt consolidation. Make sure you call Positive Vibes Incorporated.